Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 335, and today's guest is Ernesto DiGiambattista, entrepreneur and investor. This episode is the second of three interviews that were recorded live at Suffolk University with Suffolk alums. Last week, we published our first interview with Don Bulens, a five-time startup CEO, and next week, we'll publish our third interview. That's with Julia Rogers, CEO and co-founder of Hello Prenup. Ernesto has a very unique background that hits the trifecta of experience. He spent time in senior level roles with larger enterprise corporations. Then he went on to found a venture-backed company called ZeroNorth, which was acquired by Harness, and he's now an investor in early stage startups as managing director of Genesis Accel. Thus, he was able to provide a very unique perspective, not only around building companies, but we also talk about some of the inner workings of the venture capital industry. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like the details behind EIEIO, which is the acronym that Ernesto uses for hiring, that being energy, IQ, EQ, experience, integrity, and organizational fit. Ernesto's background story and how he got his career started in the tech industry and how he landed his role at Bank of America, then as an executive at Sentinel Benefits. What led him down the path of entrepreneurship, and how he recognized the market opportunity that turned into ZeroNorth and the full lifecycle story behind the company. What Ernesto and his partner Tom Meredith are targeting for investments. The importance of understanding the fund dynamics of a VC firm, like their deployment requirements and other key factors. Common pitch mistakes that he sees from founders, and why you should show customer retention and revenue growth as a priority. His view on customer success at a startup in the early stages and why it may be more important than sales, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. Did you know that we publish 3 different emails at VentureFizz? We have a weekly digest email that comes out every Monday. It is a curated email of the must-know information across VentureFizz and the tech industry. We also have a personalized daily job alerts email and a daily insights email, which features the content that was published on VentureFizz each day. Go to venturefizz.com/register to sign up. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Ernesto. First and foremost, thanks everybody for coming. I was excited. So we did a podcast of 2 guests when Boston Startup Week was happening last fall, and it went really well. So I was excited to do these podcasts live here at Suffolk University. I think it's amazing to see the level of entrepreneurship and the vibrant culture that supports building companies, which is the fabric of what makes not only this country, but this world fantastic and amazing. So I'm Keith Klein. I'm the founder of VentureFizz. VentureFizz is a website that's focused on the Boston and New York tech ecosystem. So if you're curious about what's going on here locally with startups and companies that have scaled, like the DraftKings and Acquias and Wayfairs of the world, you plug in the VentureFizz. We're not a news site, but we're more of a community website where there's a lot of things like jobs. So maybe at some point you'll be looking for a job, or maybe you're building a company and you're hiring people. So a big piece of what we do is storytelling around the company, their culture, their people. But there's so many stories here in the Boston tech scene that kind of go under the radar. So that's why I have a podcast, and I've been running the podcast for 5-6 years now. It's called the VentureFizz Podcast for obvious reasons. And I interview founders and investors. So there's over 300 episodes. So if you're looking for a MBA in entrepreneurship of listening to people that have been in the trenches, been there, done that, there's 300 episodes to listen to. And I'm excited today because we have Ernesto
DiGiambattista.
So not only is he a great founder, but he's also an investor. So we have both sides of the coin here, which I'm super excited about. And of course, a Suffolk alum. So one of the things that I think is important is, working with the ecosystem, leveraging your contacts. So what I always encourage students to do, when you have great alum like Ernesto, who is a successful entrepreneur, he's an investor, leverage your network, leverage resources. The entrepreneurship program here at Suffolk has amazing resources for you to leverage, but also leverage the alumni network. It's extremely powerful. And I'm sure you could speak to, other great entrepreneurs that have come from Suffolk.
Yeah, as Keith was just talking about, I went to school here not once but twice. I got my undergrad and my MBA. And then throughout that journey of almost 30 years now, I've I've gone back and spoken to the classroom. I've actually been on the admissions side at the MBA level, and then now as an investor, I've actually funded two Suffolk alums already. One just recently, hopefully will have an exit soon, and the more recent one is a gentleman I was just talking about earlier, Pat Condo, who graduated a few decades ago, but already sold one company to Intel for about $1 billion and change, and we just recently funded him in September. So I do this all the time. Heim recently just connected me with a student from Suffolk. So as Keith just said, reach out to the alumni and ask for advice and help. We're always here to listen and point you guys in the right direction and just give you honest and candid feedback.
Amazing. All right, so if you are building a company and at some point when you start to scale, you need to hire people. And hiring is so difficult, so important. Getting the right team in place. You're going to ask any investor, which I'm sure Ernesto will speak to in a bit, is it's all about the team. Because if you don't have the right team, you're not going to be able to execute on any idea. So you have an acronym that you use when it comes to hiring, EIEIO.
You got it.
What does that mean? This is like a good hiring tip for others.
So Art Coviello, former CEO of RSA, actually told me about this. So, when you're meeting someone for the first time, you always got, or interviewing someone for a specific role. If it's engineering, it's tech, it's sales, it's really hard. You always try to come up with these questions. So EIEIO is a super easy acronym. The first one is the letter E. E stands for energy. Does the person you're meeting with have the energy to do the job? Are they excited about doing it? The second one is I, which is I stands for IQ and EQ. They combine together. Does the person listen? Can the person ask really good questions? Can the person engage? And that's super important when you're talking to someone specifically in a outside facing role. The next one is E, experience. That's split into two different ways of looking at it. Academic, has the person gone to school and received training, something like a CPA. The other side of it could be just pure, life experience. They've sat back and they started coding and learning it on their own. So experience is super important. By the way, those first three are really negotiable. Sometimes you meet someone that you like and they have very little experience, but you may want to take the chance. The last two is I, and I stands for integrity. So I call this really simple. If Keith and I are going to get together and I'd be like, Keith, when do you want to meet next? Let him set the time. Let him set the date and see if that person is going to be accountable to meet you on that specific date and time. Why? If you can't meet someone for coffee or meet with them in a specific date or time, what do you think is going to happen in the real world when you're working on a project together and that person doesn't deliver? So try to set expectations really simple and easy. And the last one is O, organizational fit. Do we connect? Can we have a conversation? And I call it the airport test. If you and I are flying out to San Francisco and we have to stop to Chicago or here, and the flight gets delayed, are you going to take off and just go do your own thing? Are you going to sit with me at the lounge? We're going to grab a cup of coffee or start talking about a project and engaging for a couple of hours, or are you just going to disappear and read a book? Some people may disappear and read a book. I'm the different type of person. I'm going to sit there and I'm an extrovert, so I want to talk and learn more about you. So that's important. And I've been using this now for the last 6 years, and it's worked out really well. It makes it simple for me, not only when I'm looking to hire someone or to invest in someone. Is this a person that I want to work with? Because a lot of times, and we were talking about this earlier, is it transactional based or is it going to be a relationship based opportunity? So.
Yeah, and not only is that great advice as far as hiring for your own company someday, but maybe when you're graduating from Suffolk, to look at what a potential employer may be thinking about. Those are all 5 key things to be thinking about. So, all right, so you talked about you went to Suffolk. Why did you choose Suffolk, and then how did you get your career started?
Oh, good question. So how did I get started? Let's start with that one first. I actually was pretty fortunate. I went to Saugus High School, and I had the opportunity of taking some computer classes in high school, and I gravitated towards it. Before, everyone had a computer, we had a couple in the school, and we did the old-fashioned way. We'd actually write if-then statements, and I really liked it a lot. And I kind of just took that to the next level, taking it at the college, university level. How I got started in all of it, though, was interesting. I was a basketball player. In high school, I was pretty good at basketball, and I looked at a bunch of different universities. And honestly, the reason why I picked Suffolk was the most affordable for my family. And I'm sure a lot of people may say that now as well. University is super expensive, but I had some other schools in the Boston area that looked at me for Division I, Division II basketball. I was going to be redshirted. year one, year two, and there's no scholarships for that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came to Suffolk, we were talking about this earlier. I played here for a little bit my freshman year, and then I got this thing in the mail, tuition bill. And then my parents were like, all right, we're picking up half, and you have to pick up half. So my
Right.
basketball career came pretty quickly to an end after about a month and a half. But, I don't regret a thing about it. I think basketball taught me a lot. I use it every single day today. It's a great foundation to think about every day. Sometimes things go bad, some things go bad, well or bad, but you have to compete every single day.
So okay, you got the tuition bills. Okay, now I got to work through school. And how did you get involved in the tech industry?
So Suffolk, I'm sure, still has a career fair, and I went down to the gym, and there was a company called Veda Systems, and they were hiring for interns during the summer. I went down, I applied, and fortunately enough, I took computer literacy and a couple of computer classes at Suffolk freshman year. Went in for an interview, and I got a job. And surprisingly enough, a simple little internship actually grew pretty rapidly for me. I ended up pretty quickly working on a project for Christmas tree shops, and I was the first person to migrate them from a mainframe environment to a Windows environment. Pretty early on, I was 19 years old, driving down to the Cape, doing this migration all on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And my supervisor would be calling me over the phone, telling me what to do if I needed to. And surprisingly enough, I had a ton of experience within those 2.5 years working there, learning not only about technology, but also learning how to work with people. And that's really what, gave me the catapult, if you will, to kind of take me over to postgraduate.
Got it. Okay. Now, I don't know if this is the chronological. So, at what point did you get your MBA here?
Oh, wait.
Oh, wait. Okay. So
So
then,
I graduated in 98
okay,
and got my MBA in oh 08.
got it.
So I went back almost a decade later.
So what did you start? Earlier in your career, the foundational years. Like, what did those look like?
Early on, it was really mostly around technology. So as we talked about Vedas, I was really focusing on system engineering. And then my senior year, Professor Briggs pulled me aside, actually. I think he retired now, but he was the chair of the CIS department, and I was ranked number one in the class. And I already had an offer to go work for Microsoft. This is like December of my senior year. I'm already ready to go to Microsoft. And he said, no, you have to interview with Fidelity Investments. Fidelity has this management program. They come through, they look at all the best schools in the area, Carnegie, Mellon, Syracuse, University of Colorado. They were looking at MIT and Harvard, and they said, you need to go interview. So I went on the interview as a favor to him, and I was ranked number three in the country for this program, Systems Associate program. I actually had more experience, what I was told, than most of the kids in the top 10 with a master's degree.
Mm.
So
Because it was real world experience. You were in the field actually doing stuff.
exactly, I
Yeah.
wasn't working in an MIT lab,
Right.
working on a T1. I was actually at Gordon College deploying it on my own, talking to
Hmm.
the carriers, working on voice technology, working on firewalls. And as a kid, you probably don't realize how much you knew at the time, but I was pretty lucky. And then when I went to Fidelity, I was fortunate enough to get the position, and I worked with some really cool people, really great teams. I'm 22 years old. I'm working in Asia, deploying and
Hmm.
connecting servers to other banks on my own, setting them up here in Boston, shipping it overseas, and building them out. I got to work in Europe, worked all over the U.S. for almost 3 years. And that was really where you really quickly learned about the technology.
Hmm.
And then when I was at Fidelity, I got the opportunity to work with Fidelity Capital and Fidelity Ventures,
Oh.
two different groups.
Hmm.
So, to kind of break it down for everyone, the venture world is all about minority ownership. You put capital into work and you hope this thing grows.
Hmm.
The capital side or the private equity side, it's a little bit different. Majority ownership, profitability. It's all about growth. So two different schools of thought. But what
Hmm.
I really started was my first time being exposed to the concept of product led, thinking about the product. And then I had a great opportunity after that. I went to Storage Networks. Storage Networks is a great success story in Boston. We went from 0 to 300 million in 36 months. We went public with Peter Bell. He was the founder, and then we had a great secondary. But we were really the pioneers, if you would call POPs, points of presence around the globe, connecting dark fiber. So dark fiber, just to give you an idea, is what really connects a lot of the cloud infrastructure today. This is back in 2001. This is before cloud really existed. We were doing the old-fashioned way, digging up these cables, putting these servers in these data centers, and connecting that whole world. And that was a whole different level of technical skills.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just really, going back to being a technologist, really enjoying that piece, understanding how the technology works, but applying it to the business world.
Right.
That's really what, from, the early years, that was the one thing that was super important to me. And, as we talk about, I say it all the time, and it's a horrible expression, but, you know, I worked all day, and if it wasn't enough, I had all night as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I used that same philosophy when I was at Suffolk. I mean, literally, I'd go to school 1 or 2 days a week full time, but I was working and going to school at the same exact time, full time, and grinding it through.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be nights I'd be going to bed 4 or 5 in the morning after working all day and doing the assignments. So
Hard work and grit.
that's it. We heard about that earlier,
We
right?
did, yeah. Yep.
That's
Yep.
it.
It's a common theme. Peter Bell's a great founder, CEO, and venture capitalist. So what did you learn from him?
A lot. Early on, he was fortunate enough to mentor me, and being on the technology side, the security side, it was interesting. He told me really to get myself in front of the salespeople, getting into these sales calls, and you're sitting there on a technology engineering world. We're always thinking about the zeros and the ones, how to fix stuff, how to make things work. But what's the business value? What's the business problem that you're trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get that, you get into your head, you start thinking about the solution and the product and the phases. Sometimes the ideal solution might take you 2 or 3 years to get there, but can you solve something today and get on a journey and a path? And that was, it was important early on in my career to understand and appreciate that, because not anything, you can't do everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pick and choose. Sometimes you can do small little incremental changes, and you can deploy that all the way through.
Well, I think a lot of successful companies that have scaled started out doing this piece of the puzzle. They probably had the idea that we could do this, but you can't boil the ocean immediately. You need to focus on something that adds value and revenue, hopefully, immediately.
That's you're 100% right. That's the reality of it. That's how I look at it today from my perspective as an investor.
Mm-hmm.
We look at these businesses and we're saying to myself, what can they accomplish today? And then where do they want to go? And that journey is really hard. We just heard Don talk earlier. You don't just go from zero to a billion quickly. There's little things that you have to do to get there. And do you have the right people in place? Do you have the right processes in place? Is the technology in place? The go-to-market in place? It's really hard.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thought, and you have to spend the time to think it through strategically.
Yep. Okay, so after Storage Networks, what did your career look like? Because you had a variety of experiences after.
Yeah, I bounced around mid-sized startups, and then I made the big leap. I went to go work for Bank of America in information security, and that was a really great role. Not only was I on the security side, but I was also on the M&A side, mergers and acquisition. Totally different animal. And the reason for it is every time we acquired, we had to go back and clean up the mess. And if you look at the history of Bank of America between 2004 to 2011, I'm sure you guys will, if you look at that history, ton of acquisitions, growth, and we acquired two big organizations, Countrywide and Merrill Lynch.
Mm.
And those are behemoths. I mean, we can
Right.
go. The whole U.S. economy went through a whole thing back in '08, and that experience to kind of go through chaos and turmoil, you learn so much so quickly. And it's not the technology side. It's usually what other people made, what mistakes happened. How do you go back and clean it up?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, by the way, you have millions of customers. How do you keep the lights on? How do you deal with regulators? How do you deal with the people internally? And if you look at '08 and '09, we had a ton of layoffs in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we handle all this and keep things going? So for me, it was just an amazing experience to learn the processing piece and the regulators. And I think that was a big thing. That was a turning point, with SOX coming out and everything else. The world was changing from a regulatory perspective. And you have to really, and it really did change where we are today.
And over this stretch of time, you were building your career into more leadership roles.
Yeah.
What do you think was the catalyst to help you continue to work your way up the ladder, per se?
I think it's the listening part. If you want to say that, I'm gonna pick the skill right now is sitting back and listening was so important. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I was young, I had a lot of experience, but I was inexperienced in a different way. And it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes, being fortunate enough to have the technical piece and growing with that was a challenge for me, which I was able to accomplish later when I was at Bank of America. The listening part finally caught up. And what that did is, it's great to know how to do the technical piece. The listening and learning how to work with the people is the harder part. And I think that's something that we're going to, it's even more critical today than ever before. And that kind of gave me the opportunity where a friend of mine reached out to me, and he was at Sentinel Benefits. They're the largest benefits provider in the East Coast, and they were going through their own turmoil. And I just wrapped up literally Bank of America's, Merrill Lynch cleanup. We just finished that up. And calls me up, they're having issues, and I went in. And it goes back to what I was talking about. The technical side I already knew. It was the people problem. It was a people problem. It was communication, transparency, accountability. And I went in, did my friend a favor, and just spent a couple of weeks with the company. And I got to meet the CEO and the COO and the management team. And it was obviously a friend, so I put together a 30, 60, 90-day plan. How to clean up this mess. What do they need to do? Think about the vendors. Think about the people. Think about your management team. Think about everything else. And we went through that whole process. And when we were wrapping up, we're at lunch, and the CEO goes, "What do you think about joining us?" And I'm like, "I'm not looking for a VP of IT, buddy. I'm at Bank of America. I have a pretty good role there." And he's like, "No. We're going to create a new position for you. We'll make you the chief technology officer. You'll be in charge of everything. And in addition to that, you'll be on the management team and everything else at the executive level." And so I thought about it, and I went home and made that big leap, because that was like my first true executive role, where managing my entire P&L and going through the cleanup. Here's the good news is I'm going into my first executive role. Here's the bad news. My predecessor, by the 4th of July, already spent the entire money for the year.
Oh.
Gone. Gone.
Okay.
So I have no money.
No budget.
So, and this is super important to think about, because this is what I tell all my founders now when we give them money. Assume you have no money. What are you going to do? So you have to get super creative. You have to think about how to manage your P&L. You have to think about where you're going to find additional capital to get things done. And you have to become super resilient, and that's what I did. I went through that whole process to think through how to rebuild a budget and a plan. And we're talking about a company that we had to send people home a couple of times in the middle of the year. So it was nerve-wracking.
Well, one of the things I took away from your career trajectory was you had exposure, early days of Fidelity to storage networks, and through your journey, you've had exposure of different size organizations, of enterprise to startups. How do you think that helped and influence your ability to be successful as an entrepreneur?
I'm very fortunate, because now when I talk to people, what I recognize is that I'm adaptable. I can work in a small environment, but I can also work in the large, and that doesn't translate to everyone. And I see it all the time. You see career paths sometimes with certain folks. They're big companies only.
Right.
I mean, you see this in your world, startups only. I talk to founders and companies. They just go from one startup to another to the next. That's what they feel comfortable in. And I wasn't afraid. Literally, I wasn't afraid. I could go work in a startup, and if it went under, we went under. And I learned. We fail, and you try again. You go work in a big company, in a big organization. There's challenges there too. There's budget restraints, or your career mobility might be a challenge. There's a whole bunch of things there's different priorities. So for me, I was pretty fortunate to just kind of roll with the punches. There are certain organizations where, I wasn't afraid to leave when it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. You kind of have to know where some people stay where they need to stay just because they have to. In life, there's not many mistakes that you can make that are end. You can continue. You'll find something else. You got to be able to take on that risk. We talk about this all. I heard you talking about this earlier as well. You can't be afraid to fail.
Right.
That's just part of life. You're just gonna learn from it. Try something else. Do it again. Do something different, and you'll figure it out.
We talked about you went on to get your MBA from Suffolk. Like, what prompts you? Because I'm sure a lot of people debate, should I get an MBA? There's pros and cons. Like, so what made you decide to pursue an MBA, and how do you think it helped you?
Uh, so my MBA was a requirement to get promoted.
Ah,
Literally. I
hmm.
was told right to my face, if I want a promotion, it's either I move to Charlotte
So this is a
or
Bank of America
this was a
thing.
Bank of America, the conversation. It
Hmm.
was either I get the MBA or I move.
Got it.
So I call it my union card. Now, I don't regret it.
Right.
It was a great experience. Suffolk had a Saturday program. It worked out really well for me. The big thing I would say the difference between the undergrad and the MBA, the professors at the MBA just facilitated.
Hmm.
And, taking an MBA approach, it really is this management consulting approach. Everyone has a different background. They all have experience. Some folks may be CPAs, someone else might be a doctor, another person may own a small business. So when you're working on your project, your cases, everyone brings something different to the table. And personalities are different.
Hmm.
So it's almost like working in the real world, right? How are you and I going to interact and work on a project? It's a totally different perspective. Someone can be really aggressive, someone else is not. Someone can be totally passive, and you have to figure it out.
Hmm.
So I think the MBA for me, on the executive side, and that's what I got. I got the executive MBA, and it really did give me a different perspective. Because the way I look at executives now is totally different than how I look at someone coming out of for a finance role,
Hmm.
or if you're looking at a person in accounting or marketing. And because of the focus on the executive side, it gives me a different perspective. What's going to take to be a good leader,
Hmm.
right? So if I critique you, do I know how to critique you in the proper way, rather than just beating you down,
Right.
right? And it's important because I have to have tough conversations all the time. We make investments into companies, and guess what? The CEO is doing a great job. But guess what happens when the CEO is not doing a great job? How do I critique them? How do I give them constructive feedback? How do I make them think about something totally different? How is she going to take this information? Right? Sometimes I just had this yesterday. I talked to someone. I was like, I got some bad news to share. I'm not sure what we're going to do yet, but we're going to talk about this again tomorrow. So think about it.
Hmm.
Let's think about options rather than just beating the person down, which isn't fun to do.
All right, so you've had this great trajectory that I'm sure you could have stayed in a great variety of roles, leading tech organizations at global companies. You decided to start a company. What prompted that decision?
Craziness, huh? It's the now looking back, and I've heard this a million times. It's one of the hardest things for anyone to do.
Hmm.
Um, I talked about a little bit at Bank of America, seeing the regulators, how they made that shift in '08 and '09. And then around 2011, we got into this whole concept in this world of agile, which we call DevOps. So as I'm sure everyone has an iPhone or an Android, the whole idea of pushing code out so quickly was brand new
Hmm.
at the time. And what I realized with my security background, I was saying, these tools are not going to keep up with this velocity. It's impossible. I just can't keep hiring more and more people. So in 2013, I thought about building, and you heard this earlier, I went to go build an orchestration engine in my house. Basically, took some code and figured out a way to automate this process.
Hmm.
And I said to myself, this is really a solution that could work. So what did I do? I picked up my friends at Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Hmm.
Hey, what do you think about this? If someone built this, would you use it? Yeah, we would use it. Call my buddies up at Fidelity. I started calling literally 18, 20 companies up saying, hey, do you have this problem? Am I the only one seeing this? Yeah, we have this problem. What's going to fix this problem? We don't have a solution.
Hmm.
And that's really what triggered it, right? That was the initial concept. And then I started looking at the overall market, and then you do a gut check, like, do I really want to take this leap of faith? And then I was like, I think I want to do it, but then you need capital,
Yeah.
right? And we're not talking, 10, 20 grand.
Right.
Out of the gate, I knew it was a pretty significant number.
Hmm.
So I picked up the phone in the middle of August of 2015, and I called up 13 of my buddies. So I kind of gave them the pitch. I said, hey, look, I'm going to quit my gig. I'm making good money. I'm going to give this all up, and I'm going to go build this company called Cybrick, and I need you to write me a check for $100,000. And as looking at my friends, I'm saying to myself, who's going to write me a check, right? Thinking I might get a little bit of money. In 2 weeks, I went 13 for 13. I raised 1.3 million, literally right before Labor Day.
Wow.
And which is unheard of. So built my engineering team and all that, and got my group together. And then I was like, I think I need some more money. So 6 weeks later, I did it again. I raised another 1.3. This time I went to my existing and some new folks, and they were, my existing investors were impressed that I was able to get something going.
But so when you raised that the
Initial.
next million
Yep.
three, what did you build where they were convinced, like, okay, this is a first-time founder asking for money again so quickly? Why were they so like dialed in that yeah, here?
Great question. And it's all about building the P&L, right? So usually when you have a good idea, you need some seed capital. And that seed capital will pay minimally just for the engineering team and some of the founders to kind of get this thing going. What we realized early on was we need the capital to hire more engineers. I don't want to hire 2 or 3. I want to get to 8 to 9. And then there's certain things that you want to do. You want to talk about, feeding the channel, building a channel strategy, building the marketing collateral, start building awareness. By the way, we were doing something that no one else has ever done. We're building a whole market called DevSecOps. And that was a whole big debate at the time. Is that even going to be a thing? Right? And that's a whole battle that I had with Gartner. And that's what we needed the capital for. So as you're going through and you're like, hey, I have capital to run another 12 months, but I'm already thinking down the road, what do we need the next 18 months for? And that's really what the capital was, initially used, is just to build the business out and get it going. And then we wanted to ship a early product out by January of 16, which we did. And then we wanted to have our first commercial customer by September of 16.
Wow.
So it was fast. And fortunately for us, we were able to do it. Now, was there a lot of work? Yeah, it was tough. But, we were fortunate enough over that next 24 months, we raised one of the largest seed rounds. We raised 7.2 million, within 24 months. And that kind of got us where we needed to be. And, we were fortunate enough to get some early customers really quickly.
Well, I wanted to expand on that. So how did you get early adoption? Was it the people you talked to when you were doing your market research that were like, hey, I like the idea, and now that you built it, sure. Or like, how did you get early traction?
So great question. So design partners is what the term is used, or what we used was, you're talking to someone who will give you a chance, right? They're not going to give you their entire enterprise, but they'll give you a small scope. They'll give you a small assignment, and you kind of go off. And the reality of it is you give them a huge discount. But there'll be a reference.
Right.
They'll write a case study for you. They'll go on the phone, talk to analysts for you. They'll talk to other customers. So we were able to get to our first 10 customers pretty quickly. And the way we did that was a kind of combination of going direct to folks that knew that had the problem during our analysis and our market understanding. But then we would actually hire not salespeople, but sales partners. These are organizations that are talking to hundreds of customers every year. They're collecting and finding out their problems, and we would work with them, and they would get us in front of the customers, and we pay them a commission for it. So that was really how we started off before we started going after a true strategic, channel strategy.
Did you eventually end up hiring your own sales force, or was it mainly through the channel?
Yeah, after our final raise on the seed, we actually hired our first couple of salespeople, and that was really, even at that point, we were always thinking about going channel, but we had to to start, you have to build your own. And that's what we did. Then after we raised our Series A, then we really built a full sales organization while going to the channel as well.
What advice would you have on channel sales? Because you are like competing for attention. So like, how do they prioritize what you're doing versus the other providers that they're selling for?
So there's an expression, it's called feeding the channel. That's just the reality of it. If you're an early stage company and you have a great idea and you want other people to sell it, you actually have to bring the customers to them. So understanding what a channel relationship basically means is someone like Keith may have a relationship selling to a lot of large enterprises. I'm going to use your paper, right? That's the reality of it.
Right.
So you go off, you sell to them, but I'm going to bring you one of your customers. I'll say, hey, I just spoke to a Fidelity. Fidelity's using you as their partner. Great. You structure the whole deal for us. We'll give you the terms and you go sell it. And sometimes we had to do that early on to kind of get those early wins. And now all of a sudden you're seeing the effect. And then we start doing events together. Then we start doing webinars together, podcasts together. You start building, you talk about education and what the best practices are. Because that's a lot of times people don't want to be pressured into buying. They want to understand what the solution and what the value is. So if you and I are working together on a solution, it's my product or your service, and we come and join forces, it's a better value to the customers. It's faster implementation. It's a better total cost of ownership, higher ROI, and that's really what you have to kind of think through and build those case studies out.
Because I'm sure there's probably a mindset of, okay, go sell, and then you just kick back and put your leg up, and
Yeah, I wish.
but that doesn't work. It's nurturing and feed the channel.
You got to feed it. It's nurturing. Awareness is a big aspect of it too. Sometimes people are afraid. They're not sure if they want to take the chance. So you have to think through: is it inline? Is it out of band? They call it. And those are expressions that we use. Meaning, if you have a problem and they want to implement the solution, if it's inline, it means it's going to touch something in production live. Versus out of band, it's sitting outside, it's observing, it's collecting, it provides the recommendations, and that might be a better approach sometimes. And honestly, ask the customers. Sometimes, and that's one of the biggest things that we did early on, is creating a customer advisory board. You get those early adopters, get those early customers, bring them into a room, get the feedback, see what they're saying, what makes sense, what did they do well, what did they not do well in the implementation, and think through how to deploy that.
So speaking of nurturing, at what point do you start talking to investors about raising like a Series A? If you're seed funded and you need to raise an A round, like I would imagine you can't just like throw up your signal that, hey, I need money and you got to nurture ahead of time. And what do the investors typically look for? How early are the milestones when you need an A? They're like, yeah, you've delivered each and every time, milestone after milestone.
So you're always raising.
Right.
I don't know if you heard the expression,
That's a good thing to mention right now. Yeah.
You're always raising. Even when you don't need money, you are raising capital. And the reason for it is it's the talk. Everyone's talking all the time. So I'm talking, even to this day, even though I may not have founded a company and I've invested in companies, I'm talking to bankers. I'm talking to other investors all the time. When I was a founder, I was always talking to bankers. Investment bankers, what do? They're representing the buy side or the sell side, or they're talking to other investors as well, VCs, and they want to know what the market is telling them. And it kind of gives you an indication of price. What's the valuations looking like out there today? So you're always talking to venture capitalists. You're always talking to bankers. You're always talking to strategics, right? That's another aspect of it as well. Eventually, if you're going to get acquired, you're going to get acquired by a strategic. So you're constantly thinking through those aspects as well.
Strategics, what does that mean if people aren't familiar with that term?
Good question. So a strategic is someone that we did a partnership with. So for example, you're my channel. Let's say, for example, you're Accenture, right? And you have a huge service team. You go out and you make money on services. You're deploying software and technology. And I built a brand new network observability software. And I want to go sell to the Fortune 500. It's going to be really hard for me to do it. You're my strategic partner. You have all those relationships today. You know they have the problem. I provide you the software. You're providing the service, and you're selling my software. After a while, you may recognize and think about acquiring us. Why? Because we're providing you a great solution, and you can tap something else on top of that solution today. So instead of making, every time you sell our software, you're making $1. Now by adding something else on top of it, you're going to make $5. Well, if I figure that out, I'm going to go talk to those other guys and I'm going to make more money.
Got it.
So strategics are always and the strategics are large organizations. They tend to be, you got the Microsofts, you've got ServiceNow, you've got Accenture, you got a whole bunch of them out there, and they're always looking to acquire technology to expand their market.
All right, so you scale the company and then you get to a point where there was an exit. So talk about that process.
So my exit was interesting. So After our last term sheet, I decided to actually step away. And the reason for it was it just made more sense for me at that point, based upon the term sheet and everything that we saw. For me to stay or go, it actually made more sense for me to leave, hand it over to the management team that we built, and to take it to the next level. In hindsight, though, I did a lot of work at that point, and the management team ended up getting acquired by a company called Harness.io.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the that aspect, I was looking for a different strategic. You put the work, you put the effort in, but then at the end of the day, you just never know who's going to show up and acquire. I think you hear this all the time, where I don't know how often you guys hear about a company going IPO, and they're going IPO tomorrow at noontime,
Mm-hmm.
but then all of a sudden a strategic shows up and acquires them,
Mm-hmm.
literally the night before.
Mm-hmm.
And these happen all the time. You never know who's showing up. You're talking to bankers, you're talking to whomever, and then right before you pull the trigger, something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you how many times it's happened to me where we're negotiating a term sheet, we're getting ready to sign, you're in legal docs, but nothing's been signed yet. And then all of a sudden, you show up
Right.
out of the blue,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a better deal. So you just kind of get to roll with the punches, as they say. And by the way, you have a fiduciary responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to think about that as well. What makes the most sense for the shareholders at the end of the day?
Right.
So you have employees, you have your shareholders, you have your customers. So you have to think through long term what makes the most sense for the company at the end of the day.
How'd you get involved in the investment side?
So after stepping away from Cybrick, which became ZeroNorth, COVID hit, and I was bored. So I took some time off, but there was really not much golfing I could do during 2020. And I started advising. I started taking advisory roles, helping out startups and a few others. And then a friend of mine, Mike Brown, he was the former president of RSA, and he worked for DHS, 30 years in the military. We had an opportunity to advise Sequoia Capital, one of their portfolio companies, called Robust Intelligence. And at that point, I was really getting more involved helping founders. And then I ended up meeting my partner, Tom Meredith, at the time, and we invested into a company called into Cyrix.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really started opening up my eyes, the value that I could bring to the table, not only as if you look at the venture world, a lot of these guys have that pedigree. They went to undergrad, they went to business school, they went to management consulting, and they became a VC.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you'll see there's a different track as well. There's others that have been just purely operators.
Right.
They've been in the trenches, have ran a sales organization, they've built products, and I kind of took that path.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of just led me to where I am today, working in the investment world. And, it's a different perspective, but just coming, we were talking about earlier, just having that financial discipline and operational aspect of it, it gives you a different lens and view into how to grow the business.
So what are you targeting for your investments?
Obviously we like emerging tech. We look at honestly seed and A is from a stage. So just to give you guys a perspective of what that means, we like to see some type of minimal viable product. Something that's working, some early traction, some early revenue. You don't have to have 10, 20 million of ARR or in sales, but something where you have 2, 3, 4 customers, design partners, showing that revenue, showing that traction. We like, obviously, cybersecurity is my background. We like AI. We like augmented reality, virtual reality. Those types of spaces make sense to us. We see where we can add value in that. So for us, it's not only about writing the check, it's about how can we provide additional value add from an organization perspective.
So I often hear VCs talk about, what's the best way to get on your radar? And most people are like, well, if you get an introduction, right? But if you're a Suffolk student, right, and you don't have those intros that could be made for a warm, meeting request, how do you get on somebody's radar to talk about a potential investment?
I don't know. I'm telling you right now, all the alums that I know in the space, if a student or someone reaches out and says, "Hey, I'm from Suffolk," they will take the time.
Yep.
We talked about this a little bit earlier. Reach out. people do want to help you. Now, are they going to write you a check? That's a different conversation. It may not be. People hit me up all the time. I don't do healthcare. I'm not that smart. I don't know healthcare well enough.
Yep.
Right? There's just certain things I know and there's certain things I don't know. But if I like you, you're a smart person, you're working really hard, you're a Suffolk alum or a Suffolk student, I'll try to find out somebody I can introduce you to. That's the least that I can do.
Right.
People, I mean, we're in Boston. It's not a big city. It's a town, right? People, we met, 7, 8 years ago.
Right.
It's not that hard for us to reach out to somebody and saying, hey, I just met Mary. I just met Bob. Let me introduce you to so-and-so. People do want to help. You have to put yourself out there.
Right.
And, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
And like the other advice I'd tag on to that is make sure you spend your time wisely with investors that, one, have capital to deploy, two, that they are investing in the round that you're looking to raise. Some are seeds, some are pre-seed, some are A, and scale up from there. And then they usually have a lane of interest and they're deeply focused on like healthcare.
Yep.
Or, so just make sure those segments are aligned with what you're trying to raise, because you can spend time reaching out to VCs, but if they're not interested in what you're trying to do, then you're wasting your time. So use your time effectively. So
that is so true. I've done that. The piece that you just said is so important, where know what stage they invest in. Some do not play early. Some will not play, two guys in a PowerPoint. They don't play in that range. They play in, like you said, A, really B. Go to Crunchbase. Look at their investments. Look at what stage they got in it. Look at what check size they write. Because it may not fit, they can tell you yay, but the reality is if they're not writing the checks in that world, it's going to be really hard for them to line up for you.
And when did they raise their last fund,
Yep.
right? Like is it usually every 2 years?
So that's a great question, and most people don't know this. So if they raise $100 million, ask them, or whatever size round, whatever fund size it is, ask them what the deployment requirements are, because percentages matter. If they tell you 55%, that's just to make it simple, that's $55 million. And if they've already deployed $50 million, they only have $5 million left. Well, and then you're going to ask me, what's the $45 million left over for? Pro rata. And a pro rata, if you don't know what that is, it's writing more checks into existing deals. That's really it.
Yeah, follow on.
The follow along, that's so important. So if you know they have a $100 million fund and they're at 52 million deployed, they've only can write 3 million roughly. That means the rest is for follow along. So just the math matters, because then why are you wasting your time talking this? Now, if they have a brand new fund and they've only written 5 million, they have to deploy. And by the way, fund dynamics, a whole other conversation, because they want to deploy that capital as quickly as possible. Why? Because they get paid on a management fee. So it's so important to understand the whole fund dynamics as well.
Yeah, no, there's so much
That's
to it.
That's a whole other animal.
Right,
other animal.
Another podcast.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, as founders are pitching you, like, what are some mistakes that you see that people can improve upon?
So I just had a Suffolk student pitch me recently.
Okay.
I get on the Zoom. First thing, he's going right into his pitch.
Okay.
And I just, 2 minutes, I had to stop him. I was like, first of all, I'm not going to say his name, but I was like, stop. Tell me your name. Tell me where you're from. Tell me a little bit about you. And then let's talk about the problem you're trying to solve. And I think, I don't know if it's generational or a COVID thing or there's a Zoom effect. This is great that we're doing this live versus Zoom, right? It's just good to get in front of people.
It is.
I think, the human aspect of it, having that conversation, understanding why we're here, what are we trying to solve, what's the problem. I think that's so important. I want to hear this, there's a romance, I hate to say it, to the whole pitch.
Bonding and rapport.
Yeah. It's like, what are you trying to do? What makes your solution so special? What makes you so special? Why are you going after this problem? Did something happen to you personally? Like for me, why I built my company, I was a practitioner. I saw the problem firsthand. I could have gone fixed it for one company, but instead I thought I'd make it a bigger story. Right? There's something special about that. So if you're a founder or you're working for a company, why are you there? You could do so many different things. And that's the one thing I constantly see is, well, I want to build a company and go IPO. I'm like, buddy, you have no idea what IPO is. And if you guys haven't read it, read the Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. It's a great book if anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. I mean, it talks about going opsware, going public, and how everyone's so excited, and Ben's in his hotel pretty much crying.
Right, yeah.
It's like the worst experience he ever had. And I hear it. Talk to anyone who's taken a company public. The CEO's life is painful. So there's just so many different aspects to it all. But
My favorite side note of that book, the competitive company was Blade Logic,
yeah,
which is here in
I know.
Waltham, which is fascinating. All right, so what goes into a pitch, though? What's a meaningful pitch? Like, some people have different preferences on, team first, or like, how do you like to see the flow of a pitch?
Honestly, I mean, it's a great question, and I think I can see now having pitched to so many different VCs, and when I was a founder, and now being on the other side, it's so true that everyone has a different dynamics. I like hearing about the personal connection. Why are you going after this problem?
Hmm.
Why is it a problem? And why is your solution so unique and so different? And how is it going to make the customer's life better?
Hmm.
What's the business use case? And I think that if you can figure that out, that to me solves the rest of it.
Hmm.
Like if then we can talk about go to market. We can talk about the channel. How are you going to sell this thing? How are you going to price it? How are you going to raise more money? But if you actually have a big enough problem and you have a solution that you believe you can fix and you focus on the customer, that to me is powerful. Like the whole customer advisory piece, customer success,
Hmm.
like just getting a customer and then trying to keep that customer engaged. The big metric that you start thinking about, we're talking about seed and A. When you get to like B and C rounds, net retention is a big metric.
Hmm.
And what that basically means is are you keeping your customer, but not only you keep keeping them, but is that revenue growing? Are you selling more into them? Are they buying more stuff from you?
Hmm.
And that's so important because that means you're solving more and bigger problems,
Yep.
right? And I think to me, that's kind of like my thought process. Talk to me about you, your team. Why are you guys special? What problem are you solving right now? How is the customer's life going to be better? And that to me is important because then everything else kind of goes along with that.
Well, you're bringing up some other points of like scaling revenue. It's easy. Better to retain a customer than to sell a new one,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
And if they already like working with you, the appetite for doing something else and they trust you is going to be much greater than trying to open up a new door to a new relationship.
100%. So you've already spent the money. If you go to the business school, they talk about CAC,
Hmm.
customer, acquisition cost. You just spent all this money acquiring the customer.
Hmm.
Keep them. Keep him or her as a customer. Make them happy. Customer success is an important aspect to it. Just because you sold them on a solution, there might be a whole other aspect of this whole thing that you want to keep them engaged throughout the entire process. So, that's an important thing that you can't forget. And, I mentioned this before, and I'll remind the group, customer success is actually almost more important to me than sales sometimes. And the reason for it is early on when you start a customer, guess who's selling? It's the founders.
Hmm.
The founders are out there. We're shaking their hands. We're closing that deal. We're doing everything we possibly can to get the win and make sure they're happy at the end of the day. But customer success, why I tell, and I look at this all the time, is when you're going to make that hire, is because you're constantly hunting for new deals. You need customer success to make sure they're happy,
Hmm.
making sure that they answer their questions. If a product's got like a little bug, who's going to go and fix it? If there's an issue with something, who's going to address it? Who's going to escalate it properly? You don't want it to go into a black hole, especially early on when you're small. So customer success is so important in every single company that we look at. That's either what's going to make or break, and that's what we were talking about earlier. How you're going to get the customers to promote your product.
Hmm.
They're going to go out there and talk about you like, hey, I bought this product from Keith, but not only did I buy it, you won't believe they have this amazing process. I just sent an email and they responded within 20 minutes and the problem was fixed versus sending it to anonymous at whatever.com
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden 3 days, 4 days later, we received your ticket.
Yep.
That's not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
That whole customer relationship is so important early on.
Yeah. I do want to open. Anyone have any questions?
I really liked when you
EIEIO.
I also do that if I'm thinking about investing in someone, the person. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the interplay between the business case that you're evaluating and the person. Does one sometimes skew the other, or you see so many deals that there's like every box is checked? Like, talk about the person in your calculus, I guess. So you got EIEIO. There's a second acronym that I have. Which he just brought up, which is great. So I have 5 T's when I invest. So the first one is the team. And that's really EIEIO, right? Do they have the energy? Do they have the experience? Do they have the IQ? And IQ and EQ is so important on the investment side. And then, the experience, the integrity, the organizational fit. And that kind of really fits into that whole first T, the team. The second one is the TAM. How big of a market is this? What problem are they trying to solve? The third T is the technology, the solution. What are they bringing to the table that's going to make this market huge? And then the next one is traction. That's the fourth T. Are they recruiting the right people? Are they building a world-class management team? Are they building a world-class engineering team? Are they thinking through? Are they getting the right partners, strategics? Are they actually bringing amazing angel investors? Are they building an amazing technical advisory board? That's super important. And then the last T, which I've killed many deals, is the terms. It really comes down to that. Are they selling me common versus preferred? Is someone else pricing this and making it an ugly deal that we can't invest in? We just had a great company, passed all the first 4. And the terms, was preferred up for 3 years, and then we got convert to common. I'm like, how can my money convert to common? That's crazy. We killed the deal. Financial discipline plays in. So acronyms make my life a lot easier because I'm just telling you, like, there's a whole diligence process that you go through. I mean, from an investment perspective, which I'm sure you guys are learning in school, there's a whole checklist and modeling. But sometimes when you're just talking to someone, you just want to do this quick checklist and like, hey, I just went through EIEIO. Bang. I went through the 5 T's. Are we there? Yeah, I think we're there. Let's take it to the next level.
Like, valuations matter, of course, but how much of it do you see founders sometimes get too hung up on the valuation versus other pieces that might make the company more successful longer term?
First-time founders get hooked up. They don't understand the valuation. They don't understand every deal's a new deal. I made the same mistake. We all do. It's why you call it a first. Like, you just don't know. You don't realize, unless you've been really fortunate, close enough to how these deals work, because it'll get repapered. They'll get the top offs. There'll be everything. There might be people getting squeezed down, pay to play. There's a whole list of things that can happen into a deal that transform everything. And it's hard because it's not something that most people will ever get that experience. It's not something that they deal with. Most people just put their money into the stock market, go to a 60-40 model, buy indexes, and move on. It's a different discipline. The venture world is a very high risk asset class, but there's a high return. But you have to be willing to tolerate the losses. It's a different formula, a different concept, but it's so important because the valuations do matter on an exit. But you heard it before. What's 15% of zero?
Right. Yep.
Still zero.
Yep.
So you can have all of it or none of it. But
I think it's good. I don't know if a lot of entrepreneurs know the dynamics of the venture world, so I think it's interesting that we're going deep in this topic. Because when they raise a fund, they're hoping to get like one return to fund investment, right? One like grand slam, and then they're hoping they'll get the returns on. They're probably going to have, let's say, if they make 10 investments, they're going to totally lose out on 3 to 4. Couple mid-levels, one return the fund, and then a couple high performers to have their return on it. So if you think about that, multiply that times how many investments they make. Founders are spending their blood, sweat, and tears of 10 years building a company or however long it takes, but the VCs are looking for the next deal, and they're going to partner with you and be on your board, but you also need to make sure that that relationship is something that you're going to be a 10-year partner.
So it's even scarier. Is it a 10-year fund or a 7-year fund or an 8-year fund?
Okay.
Or are they going to sell you into a secondary? Right? Is that partner going to stay there with you? Because you went to a fund. I went to XYZ fund, and you and I connected, and you're leading the round from your firm. Are you going to be there in 2 or 3 years?
Right.
I'm going to have Mary now take your position, who I don't know who she is. I don't know anything about her.
Right.
I have to build a rapport with her. So it's scary.
Choosing your investment partner is very important.
So and time horizon is so important. I hate this. I ask all the time, what's the exit strategy? And they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, are we out in 36 months? Is that what your goal is? Do you want to go IPO? Because if you want to go IPO, it's a different conversation. It's significantly more capital because it's just a different economic value.
Well, and talk about
there's a whole big beast here. It's a huge
if you got
beast.
a firm that's doing $1 billion fund, they need absolute category-defining Ubers of the world. Whereas for a founder that is doing the first company and has an exit opportunity of, let's say, like $70 million after a $7 million raise, that's an amazing outcome for the founder, and they still own a large percentage of the company potentially. But the VCs would be like, oh, no, we can't do that.
It's too small.
Too
so
small.
This is what you said. You have $1 billion. So this is a big thing now, right? Like you're seeing companies funds are going back. I just saw a $200 million fund. I'm seeing $100 million. I'm seeing guys now. We used to see 50, 75, 100, maybe 150. Then they would go to 300. Now I'm just seeing funds 100. I'm doing another 100 because what ends up happening is if you have $1 billion fund, I cannot write a $5 million check. I have to write $25, $50 million checks.
Right.
Because that's the only way the math's going to work. That means you're not talking to a seed or an A. You're talking to a later stage company. You're writing a $25 million check. You better be running somebody who's got $15 million of ARR going to 40 to 50 in 12 months.
Yep.
And there's not that many out there. So you have capital that you've committed. You can't deploy. You're going to have very mad LPs at you.
Yep.
It's a whole fund dynamics. It's a whole different animal right now.
Now, make sure your business is venture fundable, meaning if you can get customers to fund your
yes,
right, and you own 100% of your company, and it's not something that needs to have this $100 million, $500 million exit, and you're making cash and eventually someone buys you. There's always this, because the media glorifies venture capital and unicorns and all these things, and movies are made about these things now. People call it lifestyle businesses, but those are damn good businesses.
Nothing wrong with them at all. I mean, and now you're seeing the rise of family offices. Family offices only really played years ago into the funds. Okay. Right? That's where they would deploy their LPs. But now you're seeing family offices really grouping up together and doing their own deals. And it's changing the landscape. Now all of a sudden you have a large fund that's been around Boston for a long time competing against the family office fund or a group of funds. And it changes the dynamics because liquidity is available. There's different optionalities, right? Thinking about a traditional fund, they have to do something. In 10 years, if not, they have to return some capital back. Versus a family office can sit there 10, 15 years and they're happy.
Interesting.
So it's just a different dynamic.
All right. Well, Ernesto, thanks so much for taking the time. Round of applause for Ernesto. Thank you for all the stories.
Thank you.